Oh, it's here. Let me set that down a bit so that we can get this set up. I'm using a new recording software, and I have to get used to it here. Anyway, so as you can see, it's Friday. We're at the 17th, and we're at 9:06 in the morning. Now, I had I wanted to get this information out. I've come across some stuff. It's extremely complex to get. The idea is relatively simple, but the details of it are quite complex. And it's just, I was going to talk to Jean-Claude about it, do it that way, but it's not easily done that way. So, and I don't want to write it up. My hands are having troubles, and I've got too much work here I've got to get done. So anyway, so I'm going to try this. I'm going to try laying it out in a video, and we'll see what the fallout is, right? And this sort of goes to my pure sleep product because of the sleep and stuff that's involved here. All right, so I've discovered something. It's, or I've come to a conclusion that may be a discovery. I have a hypothesis, however you want to put it that way. I've come to some conclusions that suggest a hypothesis. And so let me start off by saying that Elon Musk and Alex Jones annoy me, okay? They're annoying me because they're describing our current situation, all right? And that annoys me because it's way inaccurate, all right? It's it implies a natural cause for the dysphoria that is affecting our social order now all across the northern hemisphere. And note that it's not quite global. Okay, so I've discovered some stuff that ties together all kinds of very interesting information and points to a single conclusion from all of these various different bits of information. And that's what makes it complex, that it comes in from all these various different sides. I want to not take 4 hours to do this. It's taken me quite actually years probably to boil everything down to this point and understand how this was designed. Here's the deal. We're going to talk about stuff in the form of, let me see if I can shove this around and get us a bit more of a view here. There we go. We're going to talk about stuff in the form of matter, all right? And so we have, all right, now that's even, let me back up. So Alex Jones and Elon Musk are wrong. Their wrongness is what annoys me. It's being put on us from the outside. I can trace the perpetrators back so far, and who the fuck knows what's on the other side of the perpetrators that I can trace this back to, okay? This relates to bad money, geopolitical illusionary movements of countries and so on, okay? It relates to all of that, and it ties all this together, and chemtrails, okay? So chemtrails are a major portion of this, but not the way you think. So here's the idea. First we've got to get into some school kind of stuff, right? Some understanding of how things work. All right, so it's necessary to understand how human memory works, at least at some level, okay? And so we have these elements that are, there's 4 that are key, 5 really, and then there's a 6th that is a state of being kind of thing, right? So so there's 6 elements that are necessary that we keep in mind as we go forward here. So let's put these back here. Can we see that? Yeah, okay. The first one is nature of information. number 2 here is our emotional impact. All right, so that's how I got into this. Studying some of my my version of emotional impact numerics on my data in order to determine if I was getting into some error issues. I started studying that. It came up to these other things. It led me further to these other deals, and then I went all the way back to Atlantis, and then that said, okay, I got to get this, more tight and cohesive here. Okay, so the third one is repetition. And so we've got the nature of the information, emotional impact, and repetition. And part of repetition is rehearsal. We'll get into that. As I say, I don't want to take days to get all this information out. All right, so this is the big one here, and that's sleep patterns. And then we have interference. Okay. Now, all of these here is how memory is retained in the human mind. You have to have all of these things coordinated to develop a memory. And then there's this other thing, which is a state of being, which we can really call a number 6 factor here. And it's your age and general brain health or cognitive health, right? All right, so we have to bear these in mind as we go forward with our discussion on this. Now we've also got to go to the other aspect of this. These are the abstract attributes of making memory take hold. The functional part of our brains that does this has to be dealt with here, okay? Let me see, yeah, we'll have, okay, so our brain part over here, we have the hippocampus, right? That'll be our number 1. And, okay, and then we have our prefrontal cortex. There's much more to it. This is going to be a simplistic overview because I don't want to take days to get in and get lost in the weeds here. Then we have the amygdala, okay. That's key as well. DLA. Amygdala, yeah. And then there's the cerebellum and the basal cortex. Okay, so this is the part of your brain that is in charge of writing stuff to storage, okay? The top one here, the hippocampus, is the part of your brain that is in charge of like bounding the thought or the experience or the fantasy even, whatever it is that's going to be stored. The hippocampus is in charge of like making it into a file format, okay? So it's going to make it into a file format such that it can be stored to your internal hard disk, okay? So we'll use that as our metaphor here. All right, so these are brain for memory storage. And then you remember the Thoth's eye thing, you know, the Egyptian eye thing, like that. That image section in our brain is the glandular complex that is in charge of taking input and creating a thought out of it, okay? Making it into the format of a thought. These are loose analogies, right? Don't get on my case about the inaccuracies if you're actually into medicine, because you'll grok where I'm going later on. Okay, so in that sense, the glandular complex of the brain, including, well, we won't even do that. We'll just list them here. So for our purposes, we're going to be concerned with the thalamus, the hypothalamus, and these are complexes. These are not really individual glands per se. And the pituitary complex and the pineal, which is actually its own gland, okay, but it's in charge of all of these others. All right, so these are the ones that are in charge of bounding the thought for you. So for instance, the hypothalamus is what actually attaches emotion to an abstract thought in your brain. So when a purple-haired person is screaming at you and has totally lost it and has gone into Karen with her head up her ass, the hypothalamus is overproducing hormones, okay? Now, this is where we get into some really interesting bits and pieces here. Okay, so we know from, you guys know from having listened to my other shit, that the hypothalamus is also in charge of processing smell. Okay, the thalamus is in charge of processing sound. So these here are directly tied to these two glandular structures, to these complexes. We are not born with a pen and a graphic pad, okay? Our species was not intended to be writing shit down. We don't have that inbuilt to us to store memories even that way. That's an abstract structure that's been laid on our memory system, right? Hang on a second, I've got to deal with this bullshit here. Okay, so we don't have any sensory apparatus that's designed to allow us to write, and we actually have to train these little tiny muscles to move our eyes in a very rapid fashion in order to read. No matter what language, it's a training process. The abstraction in our mind to graphics as a way to communicate information across time or space is not inbuilt into our species. Our species is inbuilt to deal with external inputs to the formation of memory from a visual, the visual cortex, which goes up to it's actually at the back of the head, but it's the prefrontal cortex that routes the information. But these are and then there's touch, but that's less of an issue for storing of memory, right? But these are the key elements for creating a thought, and then the hypothalamus also attaches emotion to all of the thoughts that are bounded, and then they're stored based on these criteria and affected by the state of being and the process of storing. So all different kinds of things affect your ability to make and create a memory, which is where we're headed, right? The chemtrails. Okay, so now here's where we get into some interesting information. It gets fairly sticky. I'm not going to go down into any detail. You can double check me. If you want to check me on any of this stuff, use Yandex. Don't use any of the Western search engines because they won't show you what you need to see. Yandex has got AI behind it that's pretty powerful. Okay, so I got all kinds of notes. It's a pain in the ass. I didn't want to have to be this organized on any of this stuff. All right, so, okay, so you've seen this woman, Biz Shrink is her, at Biz Shrink is her Twitter handle. Dr. Jan Halper Hayes. Okay, so I think she's an idiot. She was a power lifter, so I don't give her too much shit. She may still have a few muscles in her. She's old like I am, so I'm not too afraid. Her mentor insofar as I can check, I can't find any deviation in the biography that would suggest that it's anybody else, somebody else by the same name. So her mentor in the shrink your brain business was this guy by the name of Carl Rogers. He had an association with this other guy, Warren Bennis. Okay, Carl Rogers is an interesting personality because he comes up with all these methodologies and protocols that he stamps with his brand, Rogerian or something like that, therapy sessions, those sorts of things, right? But this guy is from MK Ultra, so Jan Halper Hayes's psychiatric mentor that trained her and passed her up chain in academia was part of the primary movers and shakers in MK Ultra. I say primary because if you go and look through Yandex and go back and look through what the Soviets knew about this guy, you find out that the Soviets were watching him because of what he was doing with mind control shit. And he was he's tightly captured by the Elohim worship cult, okay? I don't think he's Jewish. I don't think that matters in this case. He was pretty, according to what I've seen, well, I won't go into that, but you can research his biography and make your own conclusions from it. However, here's the important part of this. So at some point, and I think maybe it was in the early 50s, maybe it was the late 40s. I don't know that if it was, I don't know that this discovery was Carl's per se, right? That it was Dr. Carl Rogers' discovery per se. It may have been gifted to him in one manner or another. In any event, though, the discovery that was made was, all right, so let me back up a little bit, okay? In terms of setting memory, the parts of the brain here that are doing this are subordinate. The prefrontal cortex, the amygdala, the cerebellum, and the basal cortex are subordinate to the hippocampus. The hippocampus is like the taskmaster, the top dog on all of this, okay? And this is where we get into some really interesting connections. There is a hormonal component, as I said, with the hypothalamus and the thalamus, both of those, and all of the other hormone-producing glands, pineal and pituitary, etc. Thyroid, all of these participate in the setting of memory. There is a hormonal flush, a biochemical flush process that creates and stores memory. So this process it takes a specific amount of time, and you graph it up, and so the actual storage of memory is when there's this hormonal flush here, right? And this hormonal flush involving the thalamus and the hypothalamus, pituitary, and the pineal primarily is what actually sets the memory for you. And it happens when specific amounts of hormones are present and other criteria. Okay, so Carl tumbled to this idea. But he tumbled to it in a particular way that affected the MK Ultra mind control project that he participated in and helped design the protocols for. Carl Rogers found the key to mind control. And other people had used brutal ways to do mind control. So they knew part of the process. This guy, Carl, got it down to pretty precise. He understood what was going on. Okay, and so when you want to control someone's, all right, so there's something else about this. Let me back this up even further. Okay. Okay, so the hippocampus is precisely involved in the storage of some types of memory. Okay, these other parts of the brain are involved in storing other types of memory. Memory can be sliced and diced. So the hippocampus is in charge of what's called declarative memory. okay? Declarative memory is fact. What did I experience? Not how my toe felt when I smashed it, but that I smashed it on this day under these circumstances, etc., etc. The facts of the matter, not the residual after effects of it or any of that. The hippocampus is like, it's keyed in on declarative memory. The facts and our perception of them, okay? So the hippocampus is not discriminatory, okay? It doesn't make sure that it's a fact before it writes it. If we think it's a fact, it will write it into memory. So this is another key element. Okay, so the amygdala does emotional memory. The cerebellum and the basal ganglia are complex physical memory. So all of my martial arts training, all of your ability to type without thinking about where your fingers have to go, sew something, cook eggs, whatever, right? Any of your physical body memory that you don't want to think about each and every one of the parts is stored in by the cerebellum. All your emotional memories are stored by the amygdala. The prefrontal cortex here stores cognitive memory, like you had a series, so it's stored, all the stuff I'm telling you here right now in my brain as I was discovering it in a cognitive fashion, as I was thinking about it, and then finally there's a conclusion. And so it's like we store all this shit in our brain, and then there's a, right, and it all comes together. Okay, so, and so that's how all of this works. But the declarative memory coming on through the hippocampus is key here because Carl Rogers, discovers that if you interrupt the storage by interrupting so if you use interference, you can interfere with this process of storing memory, and you can interrupt the hippocampus in this area right here. Right? So before it's set the memory, but after it's had the formation of the thought, because that's a key element, right? All right, so here's the concept as Carl expresses it to us, that as the hippocampus is writing these memories, it's basically taking it out of your short-term memory to write it to long-term memory. And that is a delicate process. And if that delicate process is interrupted, it disappears from both, right? You can, as it's moving from short-term to long-term, it's actually taken out of your short-term memory, and there's no cache. You don't have any cache of that thought or that memory, right? And as it's being written into long-term memory, if you interrupt it, it doesn't get written and you don't have it. So MK Ultra, mind control, didn't have to use the brutal fracturing process to shatter the mind in order to disrupt this declarative memory writing so that you could twist a personality. Easier ways to do this. One of the easier ways to do this involves the nature of the hippocampus, okay, and its tie to the hypothalamus, and the thalamus to a lesser extent. Okay, so smell and sound are very powerful. You actually have more of your brain matter devoted to decoding and dealing with smell than you do with your visual cortex. Sound is slightly under the visual cortex in terms of total mass of the brain involved. That gives you an idea of how nature thought of these things relative to your ass surviving. Okay, and so it thinks you need to be able to smell, maybe even more than you need to be able to see. Okay, so here's the thing. It has a tie between the hippocampus and the hypothalamus, all right? And so there is a direct tie there. This direct tie has to do with, actually with mating, okay? With you finding a mate and doing reproduction, which is number one thing that your body wants to do in life. And you can't help it. It's designed that way. After you mate and reproduce, you're a throwaway. insofar as the universe is concerned at that stage, right? Because you've done your primary body's job of reproducing. Okay, so that's all keyed by smell, by pheromones, by hormonal extrusions into your skin, your breath, the hair, everywhere. That's all done by pheromones. Pheromones occupy a very large part of the hypothalamus in terms of decoding and dealing with those, all right? Danger even. Danger comes from, you've smelled stuff. I want to get a hell away from that. And that can be organic and in the form of bacteria. You can smell somebody that's sick. You want to stay away from them. Or you can smell bad water, all of these kinds of things. So smell is really, really, really key. And so Carl, he clues into the fact that smell is really key, and that smell is tied directly to the hypothalamus. And then there's one other element that comes on in. And I think this other element comes in, and it's like, haha, pun intended. I think it comes in 1947, but it doesn't relate directly to the aliens. Okay, it doesn't relate directly to Roswell or anything. But in 1947, I've got some old documents and stuff that shows me that in 1947, some people, as a result of some things that had happened in the research for, had tumbled to an idea, and they'd released that idea, and I think Carl Rogers got that idea from these people in 1947. And that idea goes to an element, which is aluminum. Okay, now it is also true that there was a shitload of aluminum used in a different way than we'd ever seen before in the Roswell crash. So maybe it influenced it, okay? I don't know. All right, so we're getting into it here. Okay, so aluminum is a strange metal. You'll never find aluminum in a metallic fashion anywhere on Earth. It's in this form called bauxite, which is an ore, okay? In bauxite, aluminum is bound to all different kinds of stuff. A lot of it is kinds of clay. But basically what I want to say is aluminum, no matter how much we see it in our environment, is never raw, all right? Aluminum cannot be raw. Aluminum is so reactive, so incredibly reactive at an electrical level that if I were to have a little tiny bit of aluminum right here and underneath my finger, and I took my finger off of it real quick and exposed it, before my finger could actually leave that little tiny bit of a distance there, right? Before my finger could transit that little tiny bit of a distance, all of the aluminum there that would be exposed by my taking my skin off of it would be instantly oxidized, because it reacts to oxygen so violently. You can actually make explosions from aluminum foil if you know what you're doing, reacting to oxygen. It's that powerful. Okay, so it's that violent of a reaction. So we never see aluminum in a metallic form anywhere on the planet. We have to go and find it. We have to do all this refining stuff, mostly involving electricity, and to create heat and zap it and shit. And then we get raw aluminum, which instantly oxidizes, and then you do something to get rid of the oxide in order to weld the aluminum or form it or whatever. So in those processes, you're constantly dealing with aluminum oxide being shed in all of our processing of aluminum. And aluminum oxide is not good stuff. And throughout the 30s and the 40s, as we're getting into more and more and more use of aluminum, there's more industrial reports of aluminum oxide causing real problems for people, okay? And so now we skip forward and we find that in the 70s and 80s and 90s, all kinds of people that had been active in the late 30s and in the 40s and the 50s in the industrial environment dealing with aluminum are showing up with early onset Alzheimer's and dementia and basic brain rot. And when they analyze the corpse of these people, they find massive amounts of aluminum in these 4 parts of the brain. Okay, because aluminum, it turns out, has an affinity for binding to, what are those things called? The plaques, I can't think of what it's called at the moment. My memory is being affected. Okay, but the plaques in the blood, right? That kind of stuff. And so aluminum wants to bond with that. Even aluminum oxide wants to bond with that. This is really a key element of this. So it's actually AlO2. Aluminum oxide is the culprit here. Now here's where it gets really interesting. Carl did a lot of work in designing psychological methodologies. One of the things he did for MK Ultra was to put this idea here and connect it to the hypothalamus, because they discovered all the people in the 40s and the 50s that were affected and had their brains analyzed and stuff, sliced open and stuff. They discovered that there was a corresponding proportionate mass of aluminum within the hippocampus that was not in the others, even though the others were also polluted. And so Carl's genius idea here was, oh, look, aluminum oxide disrupts the hippocampus. And aluminum oxide, all right, so let me back, this is so complex and there's so many ways that it can be off in some of these details, all right? But you can double check me on Yandex. You can hunt out all this information. So aluminum oxide was heavily involved in, even though it was just nascently, just beginning to get into our industrial society, aluminum was involved in the Rife machines, okay? Rife used aluminum as a sensor material because of its ability to vibrate. Probably why it's used in the UFOs. So Rife's frequencies, developed up into the 1920s, were using the ionic vibration capacity, potential of aluminum as part of their sensor. All right, now, I don't know if Rogers knew this or not. I don't know where MK Ultra came up to this conclusion, but they came to the conclusion that aluminum oxide on its own is great for disrupting the hippocampus, and thus the whole process of setting declarative memory, and thus you could fracture people's minds without having to brutalize them or any of this shit just by giving them enough aluminum oxide. And I'll get to how they do that in just a second. But you could do that. That interrupts the hippocampus. They can't write declarative memory. They can't remember, actually cannot physically remember what the hell happened to them yesterday or whenever it was under the influence of the aluminum oxide. This allowed the MK Ultra people to write any kind of memory that they wanted in there by going back to number 3 here and number 2. They used to have to use emotional impact to fracture your mind. Then they went into, after they split your ability to write memory with aluminum oxide, then they go back to number 2 and number 3. And number 3 is repetition and rehearsal. So they would show you images in their MK Ultra factories of somebody that looked like you enough that you would an actor doing something, and you would remember that as though you had done it if they had interrupted the hippocampus writing declarative memory. You could not know, you could not tell at the time the memory was written what was real and what was not. Later on, you're going to assume the memory you have is real. Now, there's a subcomponent to this that actually shows that the MK Ultra people don't 100% believe their own memories. They're not quite actually bonded to the body or something there. So we'll get into that at some point in the future. But so this was the whole MK Ultra thing. Give you enough aluminum oxide at the appropriate amount to disrupt your hippocampus so that it can't write declarative memory, and then use these other parts of your brain to write in memory that they created through emotional impact and repetition and rehearsal. And then they use sleep patterns because it is your sleep pattern that sets the memory. Okay, that it's while you're sleeping that the long-term storage is actually written. It's in a buffer, so to speak, just before your REM sleep, and so this is where it gets even more complex, because this involves the pituitary, which provides the energy for setting memory in the brain, and the pineal gland, which provides the timing. This is why you should not take melatonin, because your pineal gland has a 365-day-a-year calendar in the form of a spherical micro-adjusted amount of melatonin in there and into these receptors. And then you flood it out and you've blown your whole calendar. You don't have any calendrically set tie to these declarative memories. Because I know on about what time, a year and a half back, I came across this kind of an experience. A lot of people that take melatonin don't have that time memory to their memories. They don't have that time hook to their memories. So just to plug my Pure Sleep, there's no melatonin in my Pure Sleep product, right? Anyway, so okay, so I get real whipped up about this because these MK Ultra guys are fucking with everybody through the aluminum oxide going to the hippocampus. At some point, and we'll say 1969, okay, so it took them a number of years, and we'll just say that it was 1969, because that's the first instance I can find of chemtrails being tested. Now, there's other elements involved in here, strontium and barium, okay? They also, along with aluminum, have a particular kind of a vibrational sensitivity. All of these things have that vibrational sensitivity at their ionic level. Okay, now, here's where it gets even more interesting, okay? You can absorb aluminum through the skin. You can absorb aluminum oxide through the skin. You never absorb aluminum, okay? If aluminum touched your body, it's just going to basically fuse itself. Raw aluminum is just going to basically fuse itself to the cells and extract the oxygen from them and bind them and would burn you. Aluminum oxide can easily be absorbed through the skin because, as I say, our bodies wanted to absorb it as part of the process because it's interacting with fundamentally with all of our hormones. All right, now, they discovered, somebody, 69, in that period of time, that aluminum oxide is attracted to the body and passes to and through the body. It'll pass through the brain barrier, the blood-brain barrier, if it's at a small enough nanoparticulate size, which is what's in chemtrails. But that aluminum in your sinuses, aluminum in the hypothalamus, and your sense of smell are extremely attracted because of the nature of smell being essentially an ionic process, okay? So you see why this is all complex, and we're not even touching the half of it. And I got to get this shit done so that I can put this out. I was going to do it with Jean-Claude. This idea itself is perhaps dangerous in the sense that, okay, this is phenotypically, the ability to deal with aluminum in your body is phenotypically controlled. That is, some people's, right? Kalahari Bushmen, really bizarre, Kalahari Bushmen, maybe it's because they come across bauxite naturally in that area, okay? But also natives in indigenous people in Chile and Peru, and then Finns, okay? So those three groups, Finnish people, the Kalahari Bushmen, and then a very large number of indigenous people in the south part of South America have far less problems with aluminum oxide than everybody else, okay? And Asians and white people have a sensitivity that we could say is a 10. Okay, so we have a sensitivity to aluminum that is a 10. We're fairly sensitive to it. And a sensitivity I've got to qualify. Okay, so there's brain sensitivity, and then there's also the ability to get it into your brain in a native way, in a natural way through your body. And so we find that aluminum is much more effective on the brains of whites and Asians, but it's much more easily absorbed by black people and people that are Middle Eastern or to some extent Southern Hindu, okay? And then we get back into the Malaysians and so on. So it depends on your race, not your skin color, but these underlying components of that race as to how sensitive it is. So basically, white people will be much more wonked out by a smaller amount of aluminum oxide than black people. Black people will be able to absorb a lot more aluminum oxide without those immediate kind of effects showing up. But they've still got the bad effects of it, which is that the aluminum oxide is bringing on early onset dementia through the chemtrails. Now, here's the thing. Ask yourself this: do they really believe in climate change? I don't think so. I think it's all scam, and they know it's a scam. That they keep bringing up, we got to block the sun, we got to block the sun, we got to block the sun. What is it in the chemtrails that serves them? Okay, they don't want to live under gray skies. This is entirely for us. So what are they giving us in the chemtrails? I don't think that they're really doing it to hype their climate crisis shit. I think the entire whole climate crisis shit was so that they could do chemtrails right in front of your face as they're telling you they're trying to protect you from the sun, whatever ethos or whatever ideology that they want you to have through these other mechanisms that were discovered by and used by Carl Rogers in his MK Ultra program. So they're trying, in my opinion, to do an MK Ultra program on everybody. Now, I gotta get tea, and I gotta get some more stuff done here. It's more than that, okay? So let me bring up a couple of more weird things here. This is where we get into the woo of it all, or more woo. So it's all ionic at an ionic vibration level. Aluminum has a very high frequency ionic vibration, as do both strontium and barium. Cesium less so. I don't know what the cesium is being used for, but it is in there. The vast majority of stuff in the chemtrails is aluminum oxide. Vast majority. It outnumbers all of it by it's the most of the mass. You will notice that your ability to have a sense of smell has been affected and is becoming increasingly so as we go forward. The more they spray, right? Okay, so so Alex Jones was sort of right about the gay frogs thing, but it's more than that, okay? Because here's the deal. That we call gender is controlled by the pheromonic process that runs through the hypothalamus and the thalamus, all right? That's in terms of how it expresses into reality. Those are affected not only by the taking in of the aluminum, and it eventually affects the glandular system, but going through the declarative memory here, but they're also affected by the process of aluminum and its impact on your sense of smell, the very aspect of the hypothalamus and what it's supposed to do. Aluminum oxide degrades that. It degrades your ability to deal with pheromones and to decode them. The tie-in back to Atlantis, let me get that out of the way. If you go and look in Yandex and just start searching around, even if you use their AI there, at some point you're going to be presented with information like Tartaria and other stuff that doesn't show up in Western search engines, and it gets a little weird. One of the things that you'll run across, Atlantis was involved in, so this is kind of interesting information, right? And curiously, of course, there are big piles of minerals all over Antarctica and even up into southern Chile and stuff, showing all kinds of mining, specifically extracting bauxite. And there's all kinds of aluminum processing residue in Antarctica. And the aluminum processing residue is, as we would expect to find it, all aluminum oxide, but it shows that they had been using some process, and we don't see big furnaces, so we're assuming it was electric. They had been refining aluminum, and it appeared that they weren't doing it with any kind of safety in mind, so they probably didn't know of the effect on the mind, and that caused them some other issues. Okay, so there's much more to this, all right? It gets much more complex. Each and every one of these things get much more complex as we go further into it. And it all ends up supporting this general contention that in 1969 they decided to do an MK Ultra on all of the population. This makes sense because in 1969 was the leading edge of the baby boomers just starting to get up to retirement age here in the United States that's put such huge pressure on our financial system. And you note that 2 years after that, in 71, Nixon takes us off the gold standard, which creates the first real fiat currency based on the dollar called the petrodollar, and we are here now. That lasted very, very, very few years. Most currencies only last, fiat currencies only last 52 years as an average, and we're right there. So, it's all due. It's all pulling itself together. They had to do something so they don't have to do this vast quantity of payout on the retirement systems globally because they didn't invest it. It was just a Ponzi scheme pool. The new guy is paying the old guy and you're taking off your chunk. Anyway, so I'll leave it at that. Alex Jones is correct, but they weren't trying to turn the frogs gay. That was just a side effect of trying to turn us gay, okay? They don't want us to breed. The Rife machine technology was discovered by the MK Ultra people to be able to excite the ionic, or to change the ionic excitement of aluminum oxide very easily. This is what all the 5G, all of the HARP, all of these electromagnetic frequencies are doing. They're not aiming for the graphene oxide and that kind of shit in your body. They're actually changing the vibrational rate of the oxygen molecule relative to the aluminum molecule to cause this disruption in the hippocampus that stops the declarative memory from being formed. At a specific frequency, you can't set the memory, it just disappears. So you don't remember what you were just thinking, and you can't set it in memory because it's held in that temporary buffer, which is now empty. That's that hard wall stuff. This is going to increase because they're going to keep increasing the vibrations that they're putting into our atmosphere, which is saturated with the chemtrails. So you have to look at it from their viewpoint. Our atmosphere is a 3D solid. It's just a loose solid of all of these aluminum and strontium and barium ions that are floating around that we absorb, and they send rays through them to cause processes to occur in our brain that are injurious to us, that we would not want to have happen, sprayed over their head. And, and that's another part of it, okay? Because when you have this declarative memory thing going on, you can get people not to see the chemtrails. And there is a component that shows a subset of the population is inherently weak to this, right? Inherently, they take up more aluminum oxide and it alters their minds more than the rest of us. So there's some subset of the population that is an NPC because they can be controlled more easily than the rest of us. There's also parts of the process that show that if they put out too much, got captured in the process of trying to capture these other minds. So it's this very delicate balance that they're trying to maintain. And this is all falling apart, all of the chaos, because of these extra energies from space are intruding at this point in time and altering the electromagnetic nature of our planet such that their use of Rife's technology doesn't work the way that it used to work. This is why I think Rife's technology, by the way, is useless, because Rife was doing his work and he came to these frequencies, these specific frequencies, in a period of time where we didn't have this huge giant electromagnetic stew. So his frequencies are no longer valid because we've got all these other competing electromagnetic frequencies whipping around in all of our noosphere where humans live. And so these other frequencies basically negate Rife's work. It's not that Rife's work is invalid, it's perfectly valid, but the frequencies have been superseded by the nature of the vibrational environment in which we live. So I'm gonna shut up now, right? And so you can go look up all this stuff on Yandex and dig into it. And we'll get into more of it later on. There's all kinds of stuff relating to psychicness, and we can even take it back to the Elohim worship cult, right? But at the moment, I'm just stopping with Carl Rogers here and the MK Ultra program. Yeah, yeah, that's enough. The money system is failing, and that's driving all of this. Okay, guys, take care. I'll try and do another one of these with more detail as I split it up into various different sections, and we'll examine each of these sections in turn as we go into this idea. But basically, we need to stop chemtrails. We can't be sucking aluminum, right? You can't be sucking aluminum, or if you do, don't worry about Social Security. You know, you're not going to live long enough to collect anything.